After 7 years together, I trusted him completely. Then he got drunk with coworkers, and I discovered he cheated. My heart shattered. This is going to be a lengthy account, but I genuinely believe it is an interesting story. It is currently a profoundly painful situation, but I have faith that in time, I will be much happier and more successful than I was during the 6 years we shared together. To provide some context, I am 35 years old, and he is 43. We first connected while working on a large farm in Northern California, where we collaborated for 9 months before becoming intimate. After the season ended, I moved to Southern Oregon to live with him. I have felt more stable and content in this relationship than in any of my previous ones, which lasted from 1 to 6 years. I take great pride in that achievement, especially considering I got sober 7 years ago. Throughout our relationship, we worked and lived together, and we experienced very few arguments or issues. Both of us seemed content and happy. I wondered if, after leading a turbulent life, a sense of complacency and routine represented happiness for me. We faced some intimacy challenges, which I've worked on as a survivor of abuse, but we could have potentially handled it better. Regardless, that does not justify what occurred. We both work at a ski resort in Oregon. I serve as a lead bartender, while he is employed as a sous chef. We have been with this resort for about 5 years and are quite focused on our careers. Our family consists of 2 wonderful large dogs, and most of my family lives nearby. He has a cousin and her family in California, whom we have visited a few times. We reside in a nice 5th-wheel trailer that my parents purchased for us, drive a newer Subaru we bought together, and we're genuinely enjoying the life we built and the love we shared. Now, let's rewind to a few weeks ago. I had been feeling somewhat down and exhausted since we were both working full-time and even taking on overtime, so I decided to sleep in on our day off. I woke up when my now ex-boyfriend entered the room and began getting dressed. He mentioned he was going to the hot tub at our RV park with 2 female coworkers. I had no issue with this. I trusted him completely at that moment. I had expressed my boundaries many times over the years if he wanted to be intimate with other women. I asked him to simply ask or be honest afterward. I wanted to understand if it would affect our relationship negatively, particularly if I disliked them or if they worked with us. However, that conversation never took place, and as far as I know, he never engaged in any other affairs. Now, I am questioning everything. Around 1 p.m., I kissed him goodbye, told him to say hello to the girls for me, and expected to see him shortly. After cleaning up a bit and eating, I started to feel worried around 6 p.m., as I had not received any call or text, just silence. This was very uncharacteristic. I kept reassuring myself that he was fine, and one of the women had my number in case of an emergency. You see, my ex is over 6 feet tall and weighs around 300 pounds, and he has not been in the best shape lately. When we first met, he used to do physically demanding work on the farm, but now he primarily eats whatever he wants and is not very active outside work. Even after he had all of his teeth extracted a few years ago, I still found him attractive and only worried about his overall health and well-being. I continued to tell myself that everything was fine, and maybe he went to the bar after the hot tub without changing his clothes. Perhaps they were still enjoying the hot tub for 5 hours. Yes, I could have called him, but he is an adult, and I had never felt the need to monitor him. I wholeheartedly trusted him for 7 years straight. I never even checked his phone or felt the urge to do so, despite the fact that we both knew each other's passwords and had offered to share them if the other were interested. At some point, I dozed off again into an uneasy nap until around 10:30 p.m., when I woke up with a start. I noticed the time, but saw no missed calls. Looking over at his empty side of the bed, an immediate wave of nausea hit me. Some instinct told me that he had been unfaithful. I felt a torrent of pain and grief, grappling for excuses and alternative explanations in my mind. It had been so clear to me from the start, just talk to me about it. It wouldn't be a huge deal. I'm strong enough to handle it. What mattered most was that he talked to me beforehand, but he hadn't, not even a hint, and my gut feeling was that he probably knew I would disapprove. Being involved with coworkers is both unacceptable and unprofessional, especially since they reported directly to him, and one of them was up for a promotion. I took some deep breaths, reminding myself that I would not know what had occurred until he returned home, still holding on to that trust. I washed my face, grabbed a drink, fed our dogs, and returned to bed to cry. By this point, I should have reached out to him. However, my hurt morphed into anger, and that overwhelming emotion led me to stew for the next 6 hours. There was nothing I could change at that point. I needed to concentrate on calming myself and processing my emotions. About 20 to 30 minutes before I presumed he came in around 4:30 a.m., I finally fell asleep. This sleep was deep and heavy, lasting until around 8 a.m. when I jolted upright, looked over, and saw him sleeping in his spot. The second thing I noticed was a terrible odor. My first thought was an unkempt area, which immediately frustrated me. I started gathering my snowboarding gear when he attempted to speak to me, saying something like, "Where are you going?" I did catch him saying, "What are you mad at me for now?" I was more short-tempered than I intended to be, responding, 14.5 hours without a single text to confirm you're okay or to inform me of your whereabouts. What do you expect?" In a very unapologetic tone, he replied, "Sorry, we got drunk." "Did you sleep with one of them?" Looking into my angry eyes, he responded, "No, we just got drunk." "Well, I'm going snowboarding," I replied, and I was out the door in moments. I tried to soothe my hurt and anger. I expected relief from his answer, but instead, it took time for me to settle my emotions. I think I just shoved them down and pretended to be fine. In fact, I was so disoriented that even though I told myself I ought not to snowboard that day after I parked, I ended up going anyway and paid the price on my first run. I was diagnosed with my 5th right posterior shoulder dislocation, the 3rd time it occurred while snowboarding. The 2nd time, I managed to set it back myself. I probably also incurred a torn ligament and a strained tendon in my left thumb, rendering it painful and immobile. When I returned from urgent care, he was in bed, which was unusual. Neither of us spoke, and it was over 3 hours before I had to ask him to let the dogs out since I was unable to do so. He snapped at me, asking why I couldn't do it, and when I informed him that I had crashed and gotten injured, his tone shifted and he emerged from the room. The next day at work, when people inquired about my injury, I simply replied, "Don't ride angry." I told a few friends about the situation, but when they asked if something had occurred, I confidently assured them that nothing had. Weeks went by, and there were strange vibes throughout. For instance, when I greeted one of the girls, she appeared frightened while speaking to me, which I found odd. Other instances I noticed as time went on included conversations stopping abruptly when I entered a room and odd looks exchanged. I tried to remain faithful to my spouse, convincing myself it was nothing, but I did ask him about it a few additional times as lingering feelings persisted. He provided the same reassurances as before, which gave me some level of security, but he did not provide any further details about that night, and while I inquired, I did not push him too hard for answers. Fast forward to New Year's Eve, we attended a fantastic concert, secured a hotel room with friends, and partied. At the end of the night, I went for a walk, and one of the coworkers confided in me about seeing photos of his affair with the 2 women, adding that they jokingly discussed the incident quite openly at work. I was taken aback but responded nonchalantly, thinking that perhaps we had been drinking and maybe he suggested that to provoke a reaction, hoping I'd be amenable to intimacy. Yet, I had this nagging sense that I already knew the truth, which made it hard to brush off. I chose to put it aside to avoid drama, planning how to approach him when we returned home. Upon returning to the hotel, I intended to take a bath, but my spouse requested we shower together, hinting at a desire for intimacy. We had not been intimate since the incident, and a part of me wanted to try, hoping it would help confirm to me that he was being truthful. Unfortunately, it was awkward and uncomfortable. After a while, I looked him in the eye and directly asked, "Did you sleep with either of them?" His response remained the same, but this time I could see the lie in his eyes, causing me to break internally into countless pieces. We eventually went to bed, but I was unable to sleep. He slept peacefully. The following morning, we shared a weirdly silent breakfast, where our friends remarked on how it appeared we were all hungover. Later that night, when we returned home, I remained quiet for an hour before asking him once more. I approached the conversation after seeking to access some photos on his phone, and as I began scrolling, he abruptly questioned, "What are you doing? You do realize that there are pictures from that night you spent with them, right? People at work have seen them and have had the audacity to reveal this to me." He denied it, but the guilt and shame in his expression were undeniable. Instantaneously, he demanded to know who spoke to me, and I responded, "That's not your concern." I retrieved my pillow and blanket from the bedroom and settled on the couch, sobbing and furious. About an hour later, he got up to head to bed, and I followed him, informing him that he needed to tell me the truth because this situation wouldn't simply disappear. Eventually, he confessed that they had all engaged in sexual relations. I felt an overwhelming surge of emotion, thanked him for finally being honest, but made it clear that his choices had consequences, and my decision was to leave. We were finished. I explained that had he been upfront and honest, we could have worked through the affair. He attempted to place blame on me for the lack of intimacy, which prompted me to use a term I had never used before. "You do not get to manipulate me regarding this. This isn't my fault. We should have worked on our relationship together." I added that I would keep the car, while he could take the trailer, as it was registered in my name. At that point, I felt he had just surrendered. So I took my dog and spent that night with my brother. I confided in some close friends and coworkers, venting and crying, completely devastated. They pointed out several shortcomings in our relationship and emphasized how much better I deserved moving forward. For example, I hadn't received a birthday or holiday gift in several years, even though I consistently bought him presents, however small. He once made me a necklace on a random occasion. He never bought me flowers, engaged in romance, or attempted to connect with me any longer. He would make jokes at my expense while out with friends, which I know were meant as teasing. He consistently took advantage of my willingness to handle most daily chores and take care of bills and paperwork. Luckily, I called my friends before I became too upset, and they insisted I speak with them rather than go to my mother's house, which was a 2-hour drive, given my emotional state. My brothers also left work early to support me emotionally and took the next night off to ensure I was okay and not making rash decisions. I called out of work, simply stating that we separated and I required a day off. The following day, I returned to the RV with my brother and a friend to gather my belongings, leaving some items in our shed and smaller things we couldn't fit in the car. He was at work that day. Additionally, I sent one angry message, "You are a dumb bitch," to one of the women involved. No threats or anything else, just a clear acknowledgement that I now knew what transpired. I didn't receive any response. I did have my brother hold onto my phone to prevent me from sending any emotional texts to my ex or anyone else, given my fragile state. I spent another night with my brothers, drinking and having friends visit to ensure I was aware of my strong support network. I felt so blessed and grateful. Later that day, I received a text from him, claiming he was going to take his own life and that it was what I wanted. After I provided him with the suicide hotline number, he replied, "No, I want you to know that this is all your fault." That comment could have devastated me. Although he has made similar statements during disagreements in the past, I took it seriously this time and reached out to our managers to check on him. They did so, and he seemed to calm down afterwards. I subsequently collected all weapons and sharp objects from the house, which took another hour-long trip. After speaking with others the next day, I learned he was under investigation since the woman he was involved with had approached HR to report feeling uncomfortable working with him due to the situation. Both women were in their 30s, and I believe they understood what they were doing when they took those photos and discussed the events at work before reporting to HR. I doubt he considered any of the consequences at the time, but that does not excuse his actions. He ultimately lost his job that same day. The irony could not be overlooked. I explained to the manager that I did not want him to be fired and had no intention of going to HR. My plan was to leave the job, abandon the trailer, and discover what other opportunities awaited me in the future. However, I still have my job and was granted a week off to process my emotions and determine my next steps. In any case, I realized that was a lengthy and detailed narration, and I might be venting a bit online. I have resumed therapy, enrolled in online courses focused on processing emotions, trauma, and grief, and I look forward to what the future holds. I recognize that I have been excessively codependent over the past 6 years. I feel guilty about his situation, frequently question what I did wrong, and struggle with letting him go. Part of me wishes to return and resolve our issues since I felt stable and happy in the relationship. After calming down, We resumed texting again. I maintained a cordial, supportive, and positive demeanor while expressing that I could no longer trust him and might never be ready to rekindle our relationship. It seems he has withdrawn further, showing little remorse, although he offered an apology, which feels meaningless now. There has been no discussion about a potential future together, yet he appears to be quite depressed. I check in on him via text daily to ensure he doesn't consider harming himself, contact his friends to see if they are willing to check in on him, have helped him with login information for accounts, discussed rent payments, and sent him his old resume and contact details. Which is just absurd, I know. It's extremely challenging for me to detach from what we had. In all honesty, I still love him deeply and desire for him to succeed and find happiness, but I also understand that I need to prioritize myself now and adjust to that reality. Some advice I seek concerns the RV. Everyone except his best friend, who supports my desire to keep things fair and equitable, believes I should give him a deadline to vacate and reclaim the space. I truly owe him nothing and have committed no wrongdoing in this situation, yet it doesn't sit well with me to cast him out onto the street. He is a good person most of the time, and just because he made a foolish mistake does not mean I do not want him to succeed or that I need to act vindictively. Since he has never held a driver's license, only a permit, I cannot give him the car, and I will likely need to trade it in for something more economical, given my tightened financial situation. Why do I still treat him kindly and with respect while accepting that I am receiving none in return? I mean, I am angry and hurt, and have said some unkind things, but as time passes, I aim to remain level-headed and optimistic. I don't believe that being unnecessarily cruel to my ex while remaining confident in my choice to leave will yield any beneficial results. This viewpoint is not popular among my friends and family, who argue that I should let him fall and learn to rise on his own. I comprehend that perspective as well. What are your thoughts? I'm trying to navigate how to move forward and maintain a positive outlook while manifesting a beautiful, joyous future for myself, one that is not hindered by anyone but myself. My goal is to stay single for a year, to rediscover my self-worth and determine what I want from life. I am just unsure how to go about it. It's scary and a bit overwhelming. Any advice on that would be appreciated. I'm simply seeking connection and trying to keep myself occupied while coping with all of this. Thank you for reading my lengthy account. Story 2. I created software to automate a tedious task, but my boss stole credit. After I quit, I activated a hidden code that erased his files. I was employed at a finance firm last year. One day, I suggested to my supervisor that, given my background in computer programming, I believed automation could be applied to the manual task XYZ using new technology, ultimately saving 500 labor hours weekly. He, possessing some technical expertise himself, dismissed my proposal with condescension, claiming it was impossible to implement. Determined to prove myself and enhance my resume, I took the initiative to develop the software independently during my spare time on my personal computer. After completing it, I compiled it into a single executable file and presented it to him. He obtained permission from the IT department to execute it on his own computer, fully expecting it to fail so he could mock me. To his surprise, it functioned perfectly. Despite the software working effectively, my misguided manager perceived it as an affront and prohibited my usage of it, offering an absurd excuse that manual execution was far superior, which was disappointing because it was operating seamlessly. Fast forward a few months, my supervisor found himself in need of recognition for his performance appraisal. He included my software in his examples of showing initiative section without crediting me. A senior manager acknowledged his efforts, leading to a promotion and salary increase for him. Instead of acting responsibly by coming to me for access to the code, he summoned me to his office, acted rudely, and demanded the software's code, claiming I had previously said it would not be utilized. When I questioned him, he replied that I either hand over the code or face termination. I had grown weary of his contemptible treatment, likely stemming from his jealousy. Consequently, I firmly refused to submit the code, stating I was aware of my legal rights to defend myself and chose to resign instead. Later, I learned from colleagues that my manager likely sought to take all the credit for himself without opposition. Unbeknownst to him, there was a malicious code module cleverly embedded within that executable file. Each time the software was run, it communicated with a remote GitHub repository, checking for a designated value. If it received a 1 or encountered no network, it would operate normally. However, receiving a 0 acted as an emergency signal. I incorporated that code due to his behavior, which I found profoundly untrustworthy, intending to remove it after proper implementation, an event that ultimately never occurred. Consequently, after my termination, I changed that signal from 1 to 0 to prevent anyone from utilizing it without my consent. Although he lacked access to the source code, he retained the executable file, and in his arrogance, arranged a meeting with his superior, his team, and mine to present a demonstration of this exceptional software he falsely claimed to have developed, which he had been using daily on his laptop without my awareness. However, by then, the parameter I set had changed to 0. Therefore, as soon as he pressed enter, the software activated nothing. He pressed it again, and still, nothing occurred. His laptop froze completely, rendering it non-functional. It took a moment for him to realize something was amiss, and he ultimately removed the laptop battery to force it to shut down. By that point, all Word, Excel, and PowerPoint files were encrypted, and the executable had erased itself completely. I utilized the same code, minus the malicious component, to secure a better position at a different company, where I am much more valued and find the work enjoyable. Then the COVID-19 pandemic struck, and now I am comfortably working from home, while my former colleagues from that unpleasant firm frequently inform me that they are being compelled to return to the office. Thus, quite unexpectedly, I realized I had made the best decision. The promotion and raise my incompetent manager received were revoked due to his inability to deliver on his promises. He also faced disciplinary action for losing crucial company data, which he attributed to some unidentified virus, a claim that lacked credibility, as no one is permitted to install anything on those business laptops without IT department security clearance. One night, inebriated and furious, he called me, threatening to reveal his knowledge of my actions. I pretended to be oblivious, remarking that unfortunate things happen to unworthy individuals, and proceeded to block his number. However, feeling the need to share my flawless triumph over this fool without implicating myself, here it is. Update. Hello everyone, I appreciate all the likes and comments. Your support is overwhelming. There are recurring questions, so I am addressing them here, though I tried responding individually in the comments. Right now, I need to sleep. Q1, being a finance-related firm, they typically enforce strict security measures. How could the IT department allow the manager to install the program on his laptop, and why did they fail to review its network activity or scan it with an antivirus program? A1. This company is not what many might assume. Yes, security measures like disabled USB ports and firewalls are enforced, but only to comply with client visits. Most IT staff are underpaid and frustrated with bureaucratic red tape, so unless it is an unusual request, they usually just ask for an email from the project manager and install whatever software is needed, especially custom solutions, as validation is not really feasible. I recognize this as terrible practice, but apathy prevails. When issues arise, which happens frequently, employees produce their email copies, creating chaos. Additionally, the financial data they handle is historical and not particularly sensitive. They feign concern, but even if it were stolen, it isn't highly valuable insider trading information, perhaps explaining their indifference. Regarding firewall restrictions, they can be lax. I mentioned in previous comments that they tend to block websites only upon noticing time-wasting activity. Common offenders include Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, various adult sites, and gaming sites. Occasionally, new sites are initially accessible until they gain notoriety, at which point they are swiftly blocked. Websites like Stack Overflow, GitHub, and Bitbucket are not restricted since they are not seen as time wasters, and someone regularly requests access for legitimate work. They did run the program through fundamental antivirus software, which failed to flag it as suspicious, likely due to a variety of factors, principally including subpar antivirus performance. I consistently check it on my machine, and it hasn't been detected either, perhaps because the code isn't recognized or because I employed Golang. I'm not an antivirus expert, but the ones I've tested in a virtual machine are QuickHeal, McAfee, and Norton, all of which have failed to detect anything. The company utilized QuickHeal. Q2, why did you encrypt the files instead of allowing for self-destruction? Isn't that a crime? A2, yes, I acknowledge it was unlawful. Regrettably, I lack a sophisticated justification for my actions. I was merely brash and upset. I had a sense I would evade consequences, and my supervisor had been an ongoing annoyance. Anticipating some dubious response upon providing him the software, I intended to teach him a lesson if he behaved badly. Had he acted rationally, I would have replaced it with the non-malicious version without anyone being the wiser. Even if he had provided a reasonable explanation for declining implementation, that would have sufficed. If he hadn't coerced my resignation, perhaps I would not have activated the destructive component, yet when he stooped so low as to claim credit for it while trying to eliminate me, I lost all self-preservation instincts, left the firm, and let it lead to chaos. I knew it would only encrypt the documents he was working on, because protocol typically involves reformatting affected laptops, and no one investigates the source or notifies authorities, as there had been previous, random malware incidents there. Given my history with that individual, I understood his likely reactions. That said, numerous things could have gone awry, and although I exercised caution throughout, it could have become a disastrous situation. Anyone contemplating similar actions, please refrain. Q3, how do you know what transpired in that meeting? A3, my former colleagues recounted everything to me over drinks later, unaware of my involvement. Q4, could you be caught due to your GitHub repository? Could they trace it back to you? A4, it's an anonymous repository created with a fake email address, consisting of generic HTML text with a hidden yes-no signal. I never log in or access it directly. Even if GitHub reviewed its access logs, it would be improbable for them to trace it back to my actual IP address. Q5, sometimes you mention being fired, and other times you state that you resigned. A5, I was compelled to resign. I had no choice. It equates to being terminated. I opted for a peaceful resignation as I already had my sights set on another opportunity that was in my favor. I wanted to avoid a tarnished reputation on my resume, and I did not wish to work under the tension of reporting him to senior management, which would only contribute to a hostile work environment. Ultimately, the position wasn't worth the stress. Q6, how long did it take to develop? A6, approximately 3 to 4 months. Q7, what technology stack did you utilize? A7, I used Golang for the coding, Linux as the operating system, and predominantly leveraged external libraries, relying largely on the standard library to provide everything necessary. I compiled it into a statically linked binary specifically for Windows 10. Q8, why didn't you consider selling it for profit? A8, it's not that straightforward. It would have required years of persuasion, security compliance, and other processes I was not inclined to pursue. Securing a job at another company and implementing it there was more feasible, and I received a good compensation package as a result. My goal is to build upon this experience to eventually establish my own consulting firm in the coming years, combining insights from both technology and finance. Q9, what was the final outcome for your manager? A9, he was offered a promotion and raise contingent upon the implementation of the software, a task that ultimately remained unfulfilled, leading to the cancellation of that offer and a considerable amount of embarrassment for him. The reprimands I mentioned arose mostly due to delays in client meetings that occurred due to his need to recreate missing Excel and PowerPoint files over the following 2 weeks. I understand he managed to recover some versions through his emails. Q10, is there a possibility of you being traced back? A10, since I manually copied the file onto my manager's USB drive, and he subsequently acquired approval for its installation, stating he was the owner and accepting responsibility for the software, the execution process only affected his own files. I am not implicated in any way. Even if he were to disclose the truth in the future, there is no evidence linking me to the incident. From my end, I've erased all connections and can simply say, I don't know what this individual is talking about. That concludes this, everyone. I hope you found the story engaging. If you think it isn't real, that's unfortunate. Sometimes truth is indeed stranger than fiction.